Sugar and spice and everything nice. Isn't that what little girls are made of? Maybe when they're younger, but all too often, mean girl syndrome appears when high school years begin. Today, we'll witness what can happen when mean girls go too far. Skylar Neese, Sheila Eddy, and Rachel Schoaf were considered a trifecta at University High School in Morgantown, West Virginia in 2012. Where you saw one, you usually saw the other two in short order. They were typical high school mean girls, sarcastic, entitled, cliquish, and often cruel. Mean girls syndrome or mean girls behavior is a term used to describe adolescent and teen girls who thrive on attention and enjoy participating in hateful and even criminal acts to get it. Sheila and Skylar had been best friends since grade school, and when Rachel came along in freshman year, she fit right in. The three girls were in constant contact. They spent so much time at each other's homes, they never knocked. They just walked in. If they weren't all together, they were texting or tweeting. All three of the girls were rabid Twitter users, detailing even the most mundane parts of their lives. A habit that would lead to the downfall of the two of them. Sheila was the most brazen of the three friends and was always pushing the limit at school and in social gatherings. Some of Skylar's other friends thought she was better than the three that she was so involved in as she began to grow into a reasonable young woman, and her friends seemed headed in the opposite direction. Friendships are fickle, even as adults. We can feel sad or betrayed when a friendship goes sour. When you're a teenager and all your emotions are amplified, the situation can feel even worse. In this case, it turned lethal. Sheila and Rachel began to spend a lot of time together. Skylar was a bit more mature than her two friends and spent more time on her studies and on her part-time job. When it was time to have fun, Sheila and Rachel would be long gone on their own escapades. As per usual, Skylar took to Twitter to vent her frustrations. Sick of being at home. Thanks, friends. Love hanging out with you all too. Skylar's attitude took a downward spiral. Sheila and Rachel were all but ignoring her at school. They'd often dress alike and leave Skylar out of the plans. They were together so often that a rumor began to circulate around school that they were having a romantic relationship. Suddenly inseparable, they would sit together at lunch and whisper to each other. Some kids thought they heard the girls talking about how to hide Skylar's remains after they'd done away with her. They told her about it, but she took the news with a grain of salt. Just mean girls being mean girls. Weeks of this behavior passed, and although Skylar pretended not to care with her furious tweets, not so deep down inside, she wanted her friends back. So it wasn't hard for Sheila and Rachel to talk her into going out for a night of drinking and smoking in a rural area they frequented for such activities. It was out of the public eye and easy to park in. Skylar came home from her job at Wendy's and stopped in the living room long enough to tell her family she was off to bed for the night. She went to her room. Her family never saw her again. Instead of going to bed, Skylar climbed out of her bedroom window and snuck through the apartment complex to the parking lot where a car waited with her two friends inside. It was July 6, 2012, Skylar's last day on Earth. She jumped in the car and sped off, believing she was safe with her two best friends, no matter what arguments they have. They drove to the well-known secluded area so she would continue to feel safe. Skylar never suspected a thing. When they reached their destination, they got out of the car to smoke. As Skylar wandered from the car into the surrounding woods, Sheila and Rachel grabbed the kitchen blades they had brought from home. They stood on either side of her. Sheila counted. 1, 2, 3. Then they killed their best friend. They delivered an onslaught with their blades, following her as she dragged herself through the dirt. She whispered one final word to the two girls standing over her as the life drained out of her. Why? Along with the kitchen blades, Sheila and Rachel had also brought a shovel. They tried to dig a hole in the earth, but quickly discovered it was too hard to break ground. Plan B was to cover her with rocks, dirt, limbs, and leaves. When they'd arranged the scene to perfection, they went back to the car and changed into the spare clothes they brought and disposed of their dirty clothes along the roadway on the way home. They crawled into bed as the sun rose at 6 a.m. The next morning, Skylar's parents discovered she was not in her bedroom. They called Rachel and Sheila. They said they hadn't seen her. When she was reported missing, investigators immediately felt she was a runaway. An Amber Alert was not issued, and police decided to wait and see if she came back home. Skylar's family knew she didn't run away. They plastered the town with missing posters. Sheila poured out her heart to Skylar's parents, sobbing into their arms about her worry for her missing friend. She would call them several times a day for an update on Skylar and offer her help in any way she could. No one may have known where Skylar was, but what happened to her was no secret at University High School. The rumor mill was in overdrive, with theories of Sheila and Rachel's involvement in Skylar's disappearance. State police and FBI finally joined the search when Skylar still hadn't come home by early September. Investigations into the apartment complex security footage found a grainy few seconds showing Skylar getting into the backseat of a car that belonged to Sheila Eddy.
Surveillance footage shows her sneaking out of her family's home in the dead of night.
Sheila told them she had picked Skylar up and dropped her off an hour later at the end of the road to keep her parents from waking up. She said she lied to Skylar's parents because she didn't want them to be mad. When agents interviewed Sheila and Rachel, they noticed their stories were the same. The exact same. Word for word. Suspicious, authorities began a deep dive investigation into Skylar Neese's two best friends. They found entries in Skylar's journal detailing an intimate moment that she had witnessed between Sheila and Rachel after they'd broken into her liquor cabinet at a sleepover. She lamented the damage she could do at school with the information. Investigators checked out the girls' Twitter pages where they found several anonymous accounts that were heckling Sheila about her involvement in Skylar's disappearance. There was also a cryptic tweet from Sheila. "We really did go on 3." Police confiscated all the electronic devices from Sheila and Rachel soon after. The girls were brought in for questioning several times. Sheila was always flirty and full of life. Rachel was the opposite, quiet, serious, and tight-lipped. Forensics from the girls' cell phones showed that they were texting Skylar when she was supposed to be with them. When they confronted the girls about this, their stories began to get shaky. Police were theorizing that Skylar had probably drunk too much or took something that caused her demise, and the girls were trying to cover it up. So they increased the pressure. Sheila took and failed a polygraph test. As Rachel rode with her dad to take her test, she threw herself out of the car and ran to Sheila's house for help. The stress proved too much for Rachel. She'd had enough. She snapped. She ran screaming through the neighborhood until her parents tackled her and held her down. She was threatening, hitting, and wildly swinging about. They called for help, and Rachel was taken to a mental hospital where she spent 5 days. When she was released, police took her in for questioning, and she caved. Rachel told the police what she and Sheila had done. She explained that Sheila decided Skylar had to go after they spent a weekend vacation arguing. That's when the planning began. But why? Because we didn't like her. That is the answer Rachel gave investigators. Rachel pled guilty. Sheila pled not guilty. And they went to trial. The area they had left Skylar's remains is over the state line in Pennsylvania. Sheila was afraid that would get her extra charges, so she changed her mind and pled guilty. Rachel received a sentence of 30 years with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Sheila received a life sentence with a possibility of parole after 15 years. Both of them still reside behind bars as of 2021. Skylar's demise was not entirely for naught. Skylar's Law was enacted in 2013. It allows for an Amber Alert to be issued right away in the case of missing children instead of the customary 48-hour waiting period. How do you feel about the sentences? Did Sheila and Rachel get enough time? Do you think they will ever get parole? As always, thanks for watching. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep catching killer content.